She was never wanted until someone saw her not for her age, but for the truth in her eyes. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more. When the train whistle echoed from afar, Elena quietly stood up. At the station, the wind rustled the edge of her worn-out hat and fluttered the lacy handkerchief hanging from the corner of her suitcase. She touched the wrinkled letter in her hand once more, her fingertips brushing over the faded ink. It had come from a man named Marcus Kramer, a farmer, lonely, widowed, and looking for a new beginning. "I'm looking for a simple, reliable, and warm-hearted woman," he had written. When Elena first read the letter, the loneliness she had grown used to carrying for years cracked open and turned into tears. Because by that age, especially by 50, no one wrote with the idea of starting over. But Marcus had, or at least, that's what she thought at the time. She was the only one waiting on the platform. The other passengers had already gone. As her eyes scanned the area, a spark of hope lit up inside her. Her blue dress was ironed, but the years had faded it. Maybe her eyes were a little tired, but she stood tall. Because she was still a woman, she still had the right to hope. Just then, a man in a leather jacket approached. It was Marcus. It had to be. He held his hat in one hand, his eyes distracted and without expectation. When he saw Elena, his steps slowed. His gaze wandered across her face, then his brows furrowed. "You were supposed to be younger," he said bluntly, almost accusingly. Elena's heart sank, but she held her head high. "You never asked my age." There was nothing to ask. The picture in the letter looked different. It was an old picture, but my feelings were new, Elena said, her voice shaky but clear. Marcus nodded, his eyes dropping to the ground. I wanted children, a new life, a new family. It's too late now, isn't it?" He hadn't expected an answer anyway. The man turned around and walked away. A bitter metallic taste filled Elena's mouth, tears of shame forming at the corners of her eyes. She had spent her last money getting to the address in the letter. Now, she had no train to go back on, no place else to go. With her suitcase on her back and a broken word in her heart, she started walking, wherever her feet would take her. By late afternoon, as she neared the edge of town, hunger was screaming in her stomach. She sat by an old fence, brushing the dust off her shoes. The sky had turned gray, and the wind began to carry the scent of rain. Just then, there was a sound from the bushes. The footsteps were soft, not threatening. "Did you lose your way?" said a voice. Elena turned her head and saw the silhouette of a man. He held a lantern, with a horse behind him. The color of his jacket had faded with time, but his posture was firm. "My name's Jonas," he said. "I have a small house just past that hill. The weather looks like it'll get worse. A fire, some hot soup, might do you good." Elena was cautious at first. She always was. But that voice, it had a tone she hadn't heard in years. It wasn't rushed or mocking, just real. "And what do you want in return?" she asked. Jonas shook his head. "Only that you don't spend the night wet in the rain." They didn't talk as they walked to the house. The silence didn't suffocate either of them. When Jonas opened the door, the smell of firewood spread through the room. A fire was already burning. When Elena stepped inside, it wasn't just warmth she felt for the first time in years, she felt safe. But Elena didn't sleep that night. One question kept spinning in her head. If Marcus rejected me, won't Jonas do the same? She didn't know the answer. But for the first time, it wasn't so bad not knowing. Because even if a woman had been forgotten for years, she could still be seen in a single night. Maybe what mattered was who looked her in the eye. And that night, Jonas never looked away. The morning didn't really start when Elena woke up. Actually, she hadn't fully woken up from the night at all. For a woman, sleep sometimes just means closing her eyes, while her mind still wanders through the attic of the past. She had spent the night curled up under an old blanket in front of the stone fireplace in Jonas's small cabin. But the voices inside her hadn't quieted down. Marcus's look, that dismissive sentence "you're too much for forever," still echoed in her ears. Jonas had woken up early. He'd thrown fresh wood into the stove and was boiling a kettle in the kitchen corner. When he saw Elena, he gave her a nod. He didn't speak, but his eyes did. He wasn't looking for shame or explanation. It was as if they said, "You're here, and that's enough." That was something new for Elena. People had always wanted something from her. Her smile, her effort, her loyalty. But here, in this cabin, just being there was enough. "Your hands are cold," Jonas said, glancing at her fingers. Elena noticed them thin, pale, and tired. But Jonas didn't seem to be reading her hands. He was reading her past. "Let's cut wood together," Jonas suddenly said. "My arms are still strong, but my back got stiff last night." Elena hesitated at first. She remembered the words of her elders from childhood. A man's work is a man's business, and a woman knows her place. But Jonas wasn't from another era. He just came from a different kind of presence. Outside, the air was chilly. Snow had started to fall lightly, but the ground was still soft. Jonas handed her the axe. "You can just hold it if you want," he said. "But don't look at me like that. Even a tree isn't as strong as you." Elena laughed unintentionally. A soft laugh, like the cracking of snow-covered branches. She hadn't laughed like that in a long time. They worked in silence. But unlike what she was used to, the silence wasn't unsettling. On the contrary, their quiet matched. Every time Jonas split a log, Elena stacked them neatly, picking out the driest pieces for the stove. They found a rhythm together. Two lonely people, sharing the weight of life. By the afternoon, when they returned to the cabin, Jonas pulled out 2 tin plates and some boiled barley from an old box. Alongside it, there were some dried mushrooms and a bit of goat cheese. The meal wasn't fancy, but for Elena, it was a feast. Her hands still trembled as she picked up the fork, but this time not from fear, more from a kind of accepted warmth. Just then, a sound came from outside. A horse. Hoofbeats pounding on the ground, followed by a distant voice. Jonas walked to the door suddenly, his fingers reflexively reaching for the rifle. Elena froze. An old fear rose up inside her again. If someone doesn't knock, they usually don't come with good intentions. Jonas cracked open the door. "Who are you?" he asked. The man outside wasn't visible, but his voice came back. "I'm no stranger. I know Jonas Bering. I owed him a debt, and I've come to settle it." The words were smooth, but there was poison hidden in them. Elena moved closer to the window. She couldn't see the man, but something about his voice unsettled her. Jonas narrowed his eyes. "If you've got nowhere to go, I can give you one night. But don't try to pay your debts inside." The man didn't reply, just a laugh, dry, hollow, filled with threat. "Familiar voice," Jonas said as he closed the door. "A man I once shared a table with, but now a stranger. And sometimes, strangers carry the oldest scars." That night, Jonas placed his gun by the side of his bed. He handed Elena a small pistol too. "You won't have to use it. I'm giving it to you not so you won't be scared, but so you can live like you deserve to." That night, when Elena laid her head on the pillow for the first time, she prayed. But this time, she didn't ask for a miracle. Just that in the morning, she could look into those eyes again. And even when she heard the footsteps of the past, she hoped she'd have the courage to stay. All night long, the wind scratched at the roof of the cabin. It was as if the darkness outside was trying to creep in, determined to pierce through the little world Jonas had built. But inside, there was a different kind of battle. Elena had placed the small pistol on the rug beside the bed and tucked her hands under the blanket. Not because of the cold, but because of uncertainty. What she feared wasn't the stranger outside, but the unknown inside. She didn't know why Jonas was really helping her, or where she stood in the story of her own life. By morning, the snowfall had stopped, but the sky was still gray. Jonas was boiling coffee in an old pot over the stove, occasionally glancing out the window. When Elena walked in, the silence had already become a familiar rhythm. But today, there was a thin tension in that silence. Something unsaid, a past not yet revealed. "Who was it you once shared a table with?" Elena asked directly. Jonas paused for a moment. He poured the coffee into a cup, then turned to the window and spoke quietly. "His name was Stefan. We were once partners in a land deal. But people can be more dangerous than land. He was greedy, thought no one had more to lose than he did. Until what?" Elena asked, her voice slow but steady. "Until he tried to hurt a woman. That night, I made a decision. I thought if I stayed alone, no one would get hurt." That sentence settled in Elena's chest like a heavy stone, because she'd thought the same thing for years. If I stay alone, no one can hurt me. If I stay alone, my silence is safe. But that night, Stefan hadn't come just as an echo from the past. In the second half of the night, Jonas picked up his rifle again, because there were faint footprints in the snow. They weren't heading straight for the cabin, but circling around it, scouting the area. It wasn't a threat, it was preparation. When Jonas came back inside, Elena was still awake. Her eyes were watching me outside from the edge of the pillow. "He didn't want me," she said suddenly. "Marcus, when he found out my age, he realized I couldn't give him the children he imagined. And that was the first time I realized a woman could be judged not just for her body, but for her years." Jonas said nothing. Then he slowly sat down beside her. "I've always seen my age as a flaw too. My hands aren't as fast as they used to be. My back aches in the mornings. But these last 2 days taught me something again." "What?" Elena asked, the knot in her throat still tight. "A woman's warmth isn't just in her youth, it's in her eyes. And your eyes, they pull me out of where I've been stuck." Elena turned her head. If all the words she'd stored up for years could fit so easily into one man's eyes, then why had those years felt so loud and crowded? But just then, a sound came from outside. This time it was clear. Not the weight of snow on wood, but human footsteps. 2 people, maybe 3. Jonas jumped to his feet, grabbing his rifle. Elena reached for the pistol beneath the blanket and slipped it into her coat pocket. The steps were getting closer, but they weren't stopping. "I knew you weren't alone." "Bearing," shouted a voice from outside. It was Stefan, and this time, he hadn't come alone. "Didn't think you'd changed enough to risk everything for a woman." Jonas stepped to the window and pulled the curtain slightly. "If you try to come in," he said firmly, "you won't just leave behind footprints. Even your shadow won't make it back." "I'm just giving you a choice," Stefan replied. "Hand over the woman. Step aside. Let's forget everything." That sentence sparked fury in Elena. Marcus had abandoned her for being old. Now another man wanted her handed over like an object. A woman, no matter her age, could never be part of a deal. Elena stood up. She turned to Jonas. "I was valued in this house. So now, I'll help protect it." And in that moment, Jonas admired not her age, but her resolve. Because no matter how dark it was outside, if someone stood tall inside, no danger could easily pass through that door. That night, they weren't just facing their pasts anymore, they had to face their future too. And no one was going to silence both. The first knock on the door was patient, solid, deliberate, more like a warning. But the second one, it carried anger. Jonas gripped the rifle with both hands and looked into Elena's eyes. There was fear in them, yes, but buried beneath it was something else, defiance. This woman couldn't take being left alone one more time, and no one could keep her in the shadows anymore. The door was knocked again, this time with a voice. "Bearing, I'm coming in. You've made your choice, but you still have a chance. Think before that woman cost you your life." Jonas stepped to the window. Outside were 3 men. One of them was Stefan, the others strangers, but speaking the same language: profit, ownership, fear. They had guns, but hesitation in their eyes. Because whoever was inside this house wasn't an easy target. Elena quietly walked to the cabinet next to the stove. She remembered the small box Jonas had shown her a few days ago. She opened it. Inside was a short-barreled pistol with a single bullet. She slipped it into her pocket. Every word coming from outside burned deeper into the idea she'd carried for years that she wasn't enough. But now she was. Because this home was whole with her in it. Jonas stepped beside the door. "Last chance," he shouted. "If you want to get through this house, you'll have to get through me first." Stefan laughed. "You always talk like a hero, Jonas. But now you're alone. And lonely people die quietly." Before he even finished his sentence, the glass shattered. The first bullet didn't make it inside, but it carried the intention. Jonas dropped to the floor, rifle ready. Elena moved not from shock, but from instinct. A woman who had lived alone for years didn't panic. She stayed standing. A shadow approached the window. Jonas fired a single shot, shattering the glass completely. A scream came from outside. The man wasn't hit, but he was scared. The other 2 backed off, but Stefan didn't move. "I've got a score to settle with you, Jonas," he shouted. "But that woman's worth nothing. Look at her age. What are you protecting?" Elena lifted her head. She wasn't looking at Jonas, she was focused on the door. That sentence had triggered something else inside her. A single sentence her mother had told her when she was young. A woman's age isn't written in the lines of her heart, but in where she chooses to stand. She stepped behind the door. Jonas's eyes said stop, but Elena brought her finger to her lips, signaling silence. Then the door opened slowly. Stefan thought it was surrender. He smiled, but as he took a step forward, Elena raised the pistol. Not at his chest, but to the place that best told the truth of him, his throat, where his words came from. "Maybe a woman isn't worth dying for, Stefan. she said, her voice like steel. "But a man like you is never worth living for." She didn't pull the trigger, but her finger was ready. Stefan narrowed his eyes, measured the trigger, looked at Jonas, then stepped back. In that moment, Elena didn't just push back a threat, she pushed back years of silence. Because sometimes, women fight not with bullets but with presence. Stefan stepped away. The other two men quickly vanished behind him. Jonas turned straight to Elena, gently taking the pistol from her hand. "You're not shaking," he said. Elena replied without blinking. "Every disappointment I've held inside for years felt like a bullet today. And now they're all out there." Jonas smiled. This wasn't survival, it was the beginning of something real. Because that night, Elena wasn't just a guest anymore. She was the only light burning in the dark of that home. And Jonas knew after a lifetime of silence, someone had finally understood him. Without saying a word. Yes, Stefan had backed off. But the hatred in his eyes was a fire that wouldn't burn out easily. Knowing this, Jonas cleaned the guns the next morning, checked the ammunition, and tightened the hinges on the doors. Elena quietly boiled soup, trying to drown out the uneven beat of her heart with each clink of the spoon. There was a fine line between feeling safe and staying on guard. And now, both of them were walking that line. Around noon, Jonas quietly approached Elena. "I need to go into town," he said. "We need more ammo. And I want to take you with me. People should see you." Elena froze. That sentence sparked something inside her. People should see you. She'd spent years taking pride in being invisible, fading into the background to avoid being crushed. But now someone wanted her to be seen, to shine, to be noticed. "We should go," she said simply. But together. The town was small. Dusty roads, cracked cobblestones, curious eyes peeking from behind wooden shutters. But walking next to Jonas felt like wearing armor. The first glances were whispers, then laughter, then silence. People greeted Jonas, but their eyes stayed on Elena, on her gray shawl, her neatly braided hair, her upright posture, and on Jonas gently holding her hand. Jonas stopped by the sheriff's office while Elena exchanged a few words with the baker. She bought 2 loaves of bread, but when she handed over the money, the woman pushed it back with her hand. "If Jonas brings someone with him, that someone already belongs here," she said. Elena's eyes filled with tears. It was the simplest, yet deepest sentence of acceptance she'd ever heard. On the way back, Jonas was quiet. Tied to the back of the horse were a few sacks new ammunition and some bags of flour. But the heaviest thing was the sentence hanging between them, still unspoken. Finally, just a few steps from the cabin, Jonas stopped. He pulled the reins and turned to Elena. "I don't know how to say this," he said. "But maybe it's time I stop circling around and just ask." Elena looked up. A soft breeze brushed a few strands of hair across her face. "Say it," she said, "because life's too short to stay silent anymore." Jonas took a deep breath. "The first night you came, I thought you were just a guest. The next morning, a friend. But today, I don't want you in front of me, I want you beside me." The words weren't spoken loudly, but their echo in Elena's heart was huge. Because this wasn't a proposal, it was a need. A bare hand extended by a man who had torn down his own walls. "When I look at you, I don't forget my past," said Elena. "But for the first time, remembering doesn't hurt." Jonas took her hand. "Because you're not choosing your past, you're choosing me. And I'm choosing you, not your age, not your strength, but your wholeness." In that moment, it wasn't just a cabin anymore, it became a home. Because 2 lonely souls were no longer casting shadows on each other. They were giving each other light. But that night, Stefan's trail appeared again. Fresh tracks behind the barn. Small, sneaky steps. Not footsteps, glances crawling across the ground. In the middle of the night, Jonas grabbed his rifle. Elena strapped her pistol to her belt. This time, they weren't guarding against the dark, they were guarding the future. In the morning, there were broken tracks over the snow-covered land. These steps, trailing behind the barn, were uneven, like someone walking not only through physical darkness, but also a mental one. When Jonas saw them, he didn't say a word, he just found Elena with his eyes. In that look, there was no panic, no typical masculine urge to protect. Just a quiet trust built on equality. "I'm with you. By your side." Elena checked her pistol. "He won't talk this time," she said. Now it's his turn to stay silent. The day began by following those footprints across the snow. Jonas saddled the horse, but Elena chose to walk. "I want to feel the ground," she said. I can't follow someone else's path until I leave my own footprints. By noon, they reached an abandoned hunting cabin at the edge of the forest. The door was slightly ajar, not smoke, but tension was rising from inside. Jonas approached quietly. Elena didn't stand behind him but beside him. This wasn't just accompanying, it was a statement. As the door creaked open, Stefan's voice came from inside. "You two again. Cute love story. But the ending's going to be missing." He had no rifle, just an old knife and even older rage. His eyes were bloodshot, but he skillfully hid the fear underneath. Before Jonas could step forward, Elena moved ahead by one step. "I'm not incomplete, Stefan," she said, voice steady. "I felt that way for years, not because of you, but because of all the years no one believed in me. But you can't forgive your own failures, not me." Stefan laughed. "Who are you to judge me? An old, abandoned, forgotten woman." Elena narrowed her eyes and stepped closer. "I've been a wife, a mother, a nurse, a seamstress, a loner. But today, I'm simply a woman, and I no longer live by someone else's definition of who I am." Jonas said nothing, because this fight was no longer just physical, it was historical. Unlike all the stories where women are left incomplete, Elena was writing her own ending. As Stefan stepped forward to attack, Jonas raised his gun, but he didn't pull the trigger, because Elena hadn't either. What stopped her wasn't fear, it was choice. "Go, Stefan," Elena said. "Today, I wasn't ignored for the last time. And if you stay, I won't protect myself from you, I'll protect myself for me. And this time, not with rage but with dignity." Stefan froze for a moment. In those once brutal eyes, there was uncertainty for the first time. Then he cursed and backed away. His feet crunched through the snow, but now his steps weren't threatening, they were retreating. Elena dropped to her knees, not shaking, but her eyes were misty. When Jonas came to her, he took her hand. "I didn't need to pull the trigger for you," he said. Elena looked up. "Because I'm no longer silencing the voice inside me. And you're the first one who's ever really heard what it says." By evening, as they walked back to the cabin, the sky turned purple. The stars began to appear slowly, and Jonas and Elena walked in silence. No longer two lonely travelers. Two people like two names in the same sentence. When they reached the door, Jonas stopped. "I still have something to offer you," he said. Elena turned her head. "What is it?" "Not just living together. Growing together. At every age. Every day again. Not just husband and wife. Companions." Elena smiled. "If you keep reminding me that I haven't disappeared inside my age, then yes, I accept." Jonas pulled out an old, faded ribbon from his pocket. "This was my mother's wedding ribbon. It may be wrinkled, but the story it carries is still strong. Just like you." Elena took the ribbon and wrapped it around her wrist. That pale piece, coiled around her snow-white fingers, was no longer just an accessory, it was a seal. And that night, for the first time, the silence inside the house didn't scare them, because they weren't alone anymore. Everyone's story starts somewhere. Elena's didn't start with being abandoned, and it didn't end with being turned away. Her story wasn't written by a man asking if she was young. It was written by one who asked, "Are you with me?" If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video. Share how it made you feel in the comments, because here, every story is a voice, and every comment leaves a mark. Subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. There are still many truths waiting for you.